We have a very exciting topic tonight, a fascinating one that I've wanted to do for a very long time. And with last week's election, it made sense to do it now and not to push it off any longer. To talk about Edom, this red entity. What is Edom? Who is Edom? How do we know? Where does it come from? And we want to focus on three big questions. Two questions that are always discussed, and you've heard a lot about them, and one question that's never discussed, that I've never heard anybody talk about. So the first question is, who is Edom today? Is it the United States? Is it Russia? Is it the European Union? Is it the Catholic Church? Those are the typical answers. Maybe it's the whole Western world. It's the whole Christian world. Who exactly is Edom? So that's the first question. The second question is, what is the role of Edom in the end of days? What do the prophecies say? What is Edom supposed to do at the end of days? And to answer that, we have to clarify the different parts of Edom. We use different terms. There's Rome, there's Magog. Right? Ezekiel talks about Gog and Magog. So who's Magog? Is that Edom? Is that Rome? Is that the same thing? So we have to define Edom, define Magog, define the third Rome, distinguish them. That's question number two. The third question is the question that actually I think is the most important, because this is something that I've never heard anybody speak about. And the third question is, who says that Edom has anything to do with the Roman Empire or Christianity or anything like that? How do we know that? Where did that even come from? The Torah doesn't say it. Where did that connection of Edom, Rome even come from? That's really the big question, because Edom is, of course, in Israel. In Israel, what's today Israel, Jordan, that area around the Negev, right, south of Judea, where Petra is. You've heard of Petra? In the famous rock, whatever it is, outcropping and structure. It's very close to just across the Jordan River. You can take a day trip from Israel, if they let you, to go to Petra, a famous historical, archaeological site. Talk more about Petra later on, because Petra actually does appear in Tanakh and is described as an Edomite stronghold. So we have to talk about that very important, overlooked episode in Tanakh. So how did it happen that Edom, which is territory in Israel, is now somehow associated with the faraway Roman Empire, and then eventually with all of Europe, and perhaps the whole Western Christian world? We're going to start at the very beginning. We're going to start with Esau, because Edom is Esau. That's where Edom comes from. How did Esau become Edom? Beans. The beans, okay, the red lentils. And there's really two Edom origin stories that the Torah presents. The first one is right when he's born. If guy's pregnant, right, and she has twins in her belly, and it seems to be that they're fighting, competing, something's going on in her womb, and then finally she gives birth, and the Torah says, "Vayetze harishon admoni kulo," that the first one came out entirely red, admoni, ke'aderet se'ar. He was covered like a mantle of hair. He was very hairy. Ve'yikra'u shmo Esav, and they called him Esav, probably because the root there is la'asot, asui, like he was fully made, he was fully developed, like a little man came out, hairy, red and hairy. And then ve'achreichen yatsa achiv, and then his brother came out, ve'yado chesed ba'akev, we know, and he was holding, Yaakov came out holding the akev, the heel of Esav, Ba'akev Esav, Ve'ikra shmo Yaakov, and so they called him Yaakov, which means the heel. Ve'yitzchak ben 60 shana beledet otam, and this happened when Isaac was 60 years old. So that's the first, right from the very beginning, Esav is born, and he is associated with the color red. The next two verses, Ve'gdelu ha'ne'arim, and the youths grew, Ve'i Esav ish yodei tzayid, Esav became a hunter, ish sadeh, a man of the field, Yaakov ishtam yoshev oalim. But Yaakov is this innocent, meek, sitting in tents, reading, learning, studying, sitting in tents. And then after that, the very next thing is, very abruptly, the Torah tells us that Yaakov made a nazid. Vayazed Yaakov nazid, he made this red lentil stew. Vayavo Esav min hasadeh ve'hu ayef, and Esav comes from the field and he's tired. Vayomer Esav el Yaakov, as we all know, Esav told him, Aliteni na min ha'adom hazeh, give me some of this red stuff. Ki ayef anochi al ken kara shmo Edom. Because I'm tired, I'm weary from whatever I was doing in the field, please give me some of this red stuff. And the Torah adds, Al ken kara shmo Edom. And this is why he is called Edom. So not necessarily because he was born red-headed, but because of the red stew. And we know, of course, that he sold his birthright for that red stew. And Rashi says, what does this mean? Min ha'adom ha'adom. Rashi says, adashim adumot, that he was eating red lentils. And why was he making this red lentil stew? What is the symbolism of the lentils? What happened at this moment? Good. Avraham Avinu passed away. Ve'oto hayom met Avraham. This was the day that Avraham died. He passed away a few years early because God did not want him to see his grandson, Esav, become a wicked person. So to spare him the sorrow of seeing Esav, his grandson, go off the derech, God took Avraham a little bit early. How much early? Who remembers? How long did Avraham live?
175.
He lived 175. How long should he have lived? Should have lived a nice 180. 10 times chai. So Rashi explains, Yitzchak lived the full 180 years. All the patriarchs should have lived 180 years. Abraham's life was cut short by 5 years to spare him from seeing Esav become a wicked child. And the reason that Yaakov made this lentil stew, Lama adashim shodomot lagalgal, because lentils are circular and it's supposed to represent the circle of life. So it's customary to eat a lentil stew after a funeral, during Shiva, when people are mourning, because to remind them of the circle of life. Ve'Yaakov natan le'Esav lechem unzid adashim. So Yaakov gave him bread and the red lentil stew, and as we all know, Esav took it. Vayochal vayesh ve'yakom ve'yelach ve'yavez Esav et ha'bechorah. And Esav spurned his birthright. He sold it for some lentils. And with that, we know he sold everything that he was supposed to inherit, everything that he would have deserved, his entire mission, his entire life's mission, he gave to Yaakov. And we discussed I don't want to focus on this because we spoke about it in the class on, if you remember, the real meaning of Israel last year. So if you haven't heard it, the recording's there, you can listen to it. And we discussed this particular scene and exactly what that meant, that Yaakov bought Esav's Bechorah and everything that came with it. The next thing the Torah tells us about Esav, Vayi Esav ben 40 shana, when Esav was 40 years old, Veikach Isha, and he took a wife, Et Yehudit bat Be'eri, one wife was called Yehudit bat Be'eri, Achiti, a Hittite woman, Ve'et Basmat bat Elon Achiti, and another Hittite woman called Basmat bat Elon, Ve'tiyena morat ruach le'Yitzchak u'leRivka. These two wives were vexing Yitzchak and Rivka. As we might imagine, the parents were not happy about this, that Esav married this cursed Canaanite people. If you remember Abraham and Yitzchak, they did not want to marry the Canaanites. They specifically went to marry from their own extended family in Haran. They didn't want to be involved with Canaanites. And here goes Esav at age 40 and marries two Canaanite Hittite women. And they were idolaters, and they, as the commentaries say, lit incense to all kinds of pagan things, and Yitzchak and Rivka did not like it at all. Now, the Torah seems to mention this in passing in a very random place. It doesn't fit. It's in a chapter that's actually describing all of Yitzchak's struggles with the Philistines. The whole chapter is talking about how Yitzchak's going around the Holy Land and doing all this great work and digging wells and building infrastructure in the Holy Land. And the Philistines are doing the opposite and destroying the infrastructure and filling in the wells and sabotaging everything that he's doing. Does it sound familiar? That you have the people who are trying to develop the Holy Land, and then there are Philistines that are coming and sabotaging everything and destroying.
You see it in the news all the time.
Yeah, one side is trying to build roads and skyscrapers and aqueducts and electrical systems and power lines, and the other side's building tunnels and terror infrastructure and rockets from kindergartens and hospitals. So that's exactly what Yitzhak was going through. His struggle with the Philistines is pretty much exactly textbook what's happening right now with the Israel-Palestine conflict. Same exact things. And the Torah actually says the Philistines were jealous of Yitzhak and they wanted to expel him from the land. It's really the same thing that we're seeing happening in the world today. Just like in the last 150 years, Jews came in, drained the swamps, planted trees, made the deserts bloom, transformed this barren desert into a prosperous country, and then suddenly there's these Palestinians who come and say, no, this was all ours. What's going on? And doing all this, doing the exact opposite, sabotaging all of that work, and seeking to expel the Jews, the very people that are making this land prosper. They want to get rid of them. And that's what the Torah is saying. Ve'ilo mikne tzon u'mikne bakar ve'avuda rabba ve'kan'u oto plishtim. The Philistines were jealous of him because he had all this great wealth, because he was able to find prosperity in the Holy Land, and they couldn't. V'chol ha'be'erot asher chafaru avdei aviv be'emei Avraham sitmum plishtim ve'imal'um afar. All of the wells that Avraham had dug, that he was digging, the Philistines were deliberately burying with dust and sand. And then the Philistines come and say, and they claim that it's ours. So Yitzhak goes and digs another well, a good well. ויריבו רועי גרר עם רועי יצחק לאמור לנו המים. And yet, these people, these Philistines come and say, no, it's our water. Yitzhak does all the work to dig the wells, and the Philistines come and say, no, but that's ours. It's our water. So they're constantly contending with Yitzhak, and he's getting frustrated. And guess what happens at the end of all this? Yitzhak's doing all this great work. The Philistines are constantly sabotaging, terrorizing. And this is how it ends. V'Avimelech halach elav, and Avimelech, who is the king of the Philistines, goes to him, and he brings with him Ufichol tzar tzva'o, his general, his military, to confront Yitzhak. Vayomer aleim Yitzhak madua batam elai, ve'atem sanetem oti, v'teshalchuni meitchem. You guys hate me. You keep trying to expel me from this land. Yitzhak tells these Philistines, why do you keep, what do you guys want? Right? I keep doing all this work. You keep destroying what I'm building. You're trying to expel me from this land. And what do they say? We see that God is with you. So now let's make a deal. Let's make a peace treaty. Let's negotiate. Let's make a covenant. So the Philistines are coming and saying, hey, look, we've been only good with you. Let's make a peace treaty. We've been so peaceful with you. Don't harm us. We're victims here. We didn't do anything wrong. So the Philistines, after doing all this terrorism for all these years, come to him and say, oh, now we want peace. We've been so nice. We've been so good. We haven't done anything wrong, right? Playing the victim card. Classic. This is the blueprint. Ma'aseh avot siman lebanim, right? What happens to our ancestors is exactly what's happening to us today. And of course, Yitzhak, being the nice, compassionate Yitzhak that he is, vayas lehem mishteh, he makes a feast for them, veyochlu veishtu, and feeds them and gives them water. It's exactly what we're seeing today. Who's feeding the Palestinians? Who gives them electricity? Who gives them water? Who gives them their heating? Everything. Israel. Israel's giving them everything. There are other Muslim countries. There's 22 other Arab countries in the area. They don't help the Palestinians. Israel's expected to provide food and water and aid and everything to these same Palestinians that are seeking Israel's destruction and want to wipe it off the face of the earth from the river to the sea. That's exactly what the Torah is saying happened with Yitzhak. The same people that were oppressing him, terrorizing him, destroying all of his infrastructure, then come and say, oh no, we're so nice and let's make peace. Let's do a two-state solution. We need all this stuff. And he gives them food and water and exactly the same thing that we're seeing today. And in the midst of this, you have, in this chapter, suddenly, Esau marries Yehudit and Basmat, these Canaanites. So while Yitzhak, the father, is struggling with the Philistines and Canaanites, Esau does this kind of treacherous act and goes and marries 2 Canaanite women. Now, the fact that he marries 2 women simultaneously is also very important. Why does the Torah say that he marries both of them in one sentence, in one event? When's the last time we saw somebody marry 2 women? Yaakov's not married yet. Esau married first. Previously, Yitzhak married Rivka, He was always monogamous. Abraham was married to Sarah. At one point, he had the concubine Hagar. Okay, but it never says that he specifically married two women simultaneously at once. Who's really the only person that we saw that married two women at once? Exactly, it was Lamech. Lamech, who was a descendant of Cain. You remember this story in chapter 4? It says, Ve'ikach lo Lamech shtei nashim, shema achat Ada, v'shema sheni Tzila. That Lamech was the first person to marry two women. He was a descendant of Cain, and if you remember the story, he ends up killing Cain. Cain was allowed to be alive after he murdered Abel for 7 generations. Lamech was the 7th generation, or Lamech and his son, and Tuval Cain. And he ends up, actually, if you remember the story, I don't want to get into it now, Lamech was blind, he was out hunting with his son, and then he shoots the arrow, and they accidentally hit Cain and kill Cain. So we'll leave that story for another time, but the Torah presents Lamech as the first polygamist. He's the first person to take 2 wives. And the Torah is making that clear connection between Esau and Lamech. These 2 people who take 2 wives. And Rashi explains, why does the Torah even mention this whole thing that somebody took 2 wives? Okay, so what? And Rashi says, Kachaya darkan shel dor mabul. That's what people would do in the pre-flood generation, those wicked generations before the flood. They would take 2 wives. Achat lifiriya uridiya, ve'achat letashmish. 1 wife to be like the housewife and for reproduction and to have the babies, and the other for fun. And the one that zoshehi letashmish, the one that would be for fun, they would give her mashka kos shel ikarin. They would give her a solution, a drink that would make her sterile, a sterilizing drink, so that she couldn't get pregnant. Kidesha te'aker, umekushetet kechala u'ma'achila me'adanim. They would give her all these, treat her, she would be like a princess, and she would be the trophy wife that's for fun, and her fellow, vechaverta nezufa ve'avela ke'almana, would be suffering, would be at home, taking care of everything, and would be abused, essentially. That's what they would do. And there's a verse for it in the book of Job. So that's what the wicked pre-flood generations did, this polygamous practice of having 2 wives, 1 for reproduction and 1 for fun. And so Lamech was the first to do it and then inspired many others in the pre-flood generations. And now, jump ahead, the next person who's described in this exact same language is Esau, who does this strange thing and marries 2 Canaanite women simultaneously. So again, you're starting to see the qualities of Esau. This is man of the field, this hunter, this violent guy, this bloody guy. Doesn't care about his birthright, doesn't care about his holy mission, being the descendant of Avram and Yitzchak. That's what we're seeing. Just as an interesting aside, when I read this verse, I was putting this together late last night, one thing that jumped out at me, if I read this verse to you, I don't know, it hit me. I don't know if it'll hit you. When you hear this, Ve'ikach isha et Yehudit bat be'eri, who do you think about? Yehudit bat be'eri. No, I'm thinking somebody right now, a contemporary person. No? I read this verse. I thought of the Yanuka Rav.
Well, I thought that too, but I didn't think that's what you were thinking.
No, that's what I knew you would think of. You guys have heard of the Yanuka Rav? Yeah? In Israel? So his name is Shlomo, he's a rabbi in Israel, Shlomo Yehuda Be'eri, that's his name. Yeah. You've probably seen videos. He's this great Talmid Chacham, and people are coming to listen to him, and he's playing the piano, and some people think he might be Mashiach, and whatever. He's this great tzaddik in Israel. So I just thought it was really strange. It jumped out at me that you have Yehudit bat Be'eri, and for some reason I thought of the Yanuka Rav, Yehuda Be'eri. And then as I'm continuing to read the verse, just sharing my thoughts, it says Basmat bat Elon. I think right away of Elon Musk, because Elon might seem trivial, but what does Basmat mean?
Yeah, musk, perfume.
Basmat literally means musk. Basmat is bosem. Bosem is a fragrant smell, a fragrant spice. So you have Basmat Elon, you have Elon Musk, and you have the Yanuka Rav. So make of that what you want. I don't know why that jumped out at me. But maybe it has something to do with everything that's going on in the world today. And in this chapter that's really describing the Arab-Israeli conflict, that Yitzhak is dealing with these Philistines. And then at the end of it, it's this strange statement with these two names. I don't know if you heard, but Trump just actually appointed Elon Musk to be part of his government. So it's a very interesting, right now, fresh, hot off the presses. Elon Musk is getting into government. This week's Parsha is Vayera. So I thought about what am I going to talk about during Seudah Shlishit? And I said, well, Vayera is one of the main stories is Sodom, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so I wrote a whole book about it. The first sefer that I wrote was about Mayim Acharonim, which, washing after the meal, which our sages say is to wash away melach sdomit. So the reason that we wash, after you eat a meal, you're supposed to wash your hands with that little vessel, you wash your knuckles. And the sages say you do that to wash away melach sdomit, to wash away the Sodomite character. So I thought I'll talk about that during Seudah Shlishit. And I took my book to read it just so that refresh my memory so that I don't forget anything. And I noticed on the first page, right in the introduction, for some reason I used the word Trump as a verb. Okay? As a verb. And I'm like, that's strange. I don't use that word usually. So it's strange that in the introduction to the book, I use the word Trump. And then if you have a copy of the book, the last page of the book is about the Yanuka, meaning not the Yanuka Rav in Israel today, the Yanuka meaning the child, the holy child in the Zohar. So I just thought it was funny that this book I wrote in 2013, it was published in 2014. Nobody was thinking about Trump being president yet. So I'm gonna explain that. And I didn't know about the Yanuka Rav. I don't think anybody did yet back then, 2013, 2014. But I just thought it's interesting that it was there because the whole point of the book, the context, the whole point of the book being Mayim Acharonim, Last Waters, it's a metaphor for the end of days, essentially, because the Arizal says that when you do Mayim Acharonim, what you're supposed to meditate on is a particular name of God that appears just once in the Tanakh, which is Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. I will be what I will be. And of course, our sages say, what does that mean? Moshe asked, before the Exodus, Moshe asked God, what should I call you? And God says, I will be what I will be. And the commentaries say, what does that mean? Meaning God said, I will be with you in this redemption as I will be with you in the final redemption. I will be with you now at this redemption with Moshe, and I will be with you now at the end of days at the redemption with Mashiach. And so there's this deeper mystical meditation on Mayim Acharonim that it represents the final redemption. The waters at the end of the purifying waters at the end of days. Like Isaiah says, Yeshayahu says that at the end of days, knowledge of God will fill the world like water fills the seas. So the whole point of that book is actually more like a mission statement of bringing about the Geula. This is what we have to do. We wash away the Sodomite character. If we get rid of all of that energy of Sodom, the greed, the corruption, the sexual immorality, all the horrible things that the Sodomites stood for, if we wash it away, then we can bring about Geula. That was the whole point of the book. So I just thought it was funny that came up, and now we're kind of in this time where we feel like very much we're in the end of days. We're in the time of these last waters of Mayim Acharonim. And it ended up being my website. Some people ask me, why is your website Mayim Acharonim? What's the connection? So it ended up being the website, because really, and it makes sense, because that's really the whole mission statement, is bringing about the final waters. How do we bring about Geula? So I just thought it was funny that there's Trump on the first page and the Yanuka on the last page. So maybe it all has something to do with what's going on in the world today. Anyway, that was just a funny aside. Esau's wives with Yehudit bat Be'eri and Basmat bat Elon. Maybe it's somehow connected to everything we hear in the news today. Back to Esau's story. The next chapter is all about how Yitzhak wanted to bless Esau, and we know the story. I'm not going to go over it again. Yaakov ends up doing this little trick with Rivka, and we talked about that in the previous class on the real meaning of Israel, so I'm not going to do it again here. But the conclusion of that is that Esau really wanted a bracha, and he's completely devastated. And I don't know about you, but when I read this, it's always like just pulls at your heart, because you feel so bad for him. Like he's just crying. Say, Vayomer Esav el Aviv, abracha achat Hi lecha, like he tells his dad, Daddy, do you only have one blessing? Like you can't spare another blessing for your child, you know? Avi balcheni gamani, like I also want a bracha. And he keeps saying it, gamani avi ve'isai esav kolo vayev. He says daddy 3 times in this verse. Like it's so heartbreaking. It's such a heartbreaking thing to read. Like, give me one blessing. You don't have a blessing for me, nothing. He's crying. He really wants a blessing. And Yitzhak does bless him. And it says, Vayan Yitzhak, he tells them, Ina mishmanei haaretz yiheh moshavecha, umital hashamayim me'al. You will enjoy the fat of the earth and the dew of heaven. You'll be very wealthy. But, ve'al charbecha tichyeh, you will live by the sword. Ve'et achicha ta'avod, and you shall serve your brother. Ve'aya kasher tarid, ufarakta ulo me'al tzvarecha. But, every now and then, you're going to grow restless, and you're going to break his yoke from your neck. That's the blessing that Yitzhak gives Esav. And I think this is where we first start to see an association between Esav and Europe. Because this is precisely European history and European relations, Christian-Jewish relations in Europe throughout history. Yitzhak promises Esav that he'll be very rich, and Europe is arguably the richest continent on the planet, was very rich, very powerful throughout history. Lots of water, lots of fertile land, lots of iron, lots of coal. It's got everything. And gave Europe the ability to really conquer the world, to dominate the whole planet. And Yitzhak said that Esav, you will be dominant. And Europe becomes dominant. And he says Esav will live by the sword. And Europe is also the most violent and bloodiest continent on the planet. Europe started more wars than any other. More genocides, more catastrophes, more war. The bloodiest conflicts in history were European conflicts. World War I, World War II. Some say that even more deadlier than that was the 30 Years' War. In the 1600s, in relative terms, it was probably even worse than World War I and World War II. So this is like the bloodiest, deadliest conflicts in history were on this continent and spread from that continent. And this is really what Yitzhak prophetically tells Esav, that you're going to live by the sword, and that Yaakov will be even more prosperous than you, and you will be indebted to him, and that's also European history of European kings and kingdoms really forcing Jews to be bankers because they didn't allow Jews to do anything else. If you were a Jew in Europe for most of history, you were not a legal person. You could not own land. You could not be a farmer. You probably couldn't join any guilds. You couldn't do anything. You were limited to very few professions, and usually it was just being a merchant or a banker or something like that. And in some places, they would welcome, various European kingdoms would welcome Jews to live in the land on the condition that they would open banks, because Christians were not allowed to lend to each other, and you can't have a working society without banking. We all use banks. You need banking, because if you don't have money, then you need to borrow it from somebody. Throughout European history, you have these kingdoms who loan money from the Jews, and then when they can't pay it back, they say, okay, now's the time for a nice pogrom. Let's wipe away our debt, slaughter all the Jews, wipe away the debt. That's happened throughout. It happened in England. It happened in France many, many times. In England, in 1290, the English expelled the Jews, but the king did something awesome. He expelled all the Jews and said, now all of their debts are mine. Right? So everybody had to pay the king. All the money that was owed to the Jews, the king took over the Jewish bank for himself. So that's really, again, what Yitzhak is saying, that Esav will be indebted to Yaakov, but then every so often he will break the yoke of that debt and will fight him off and exterminate, whatever it is, expel him, exterminate him. So in this one verse, really, Yitzhak is encapsulating Jewish Christian history in Europe. So I think you start seeing that association, the Esav Europe association, the Esav Christendom association right here in this blessing. And we know how it continues, that Esav then hates Yaakov. He bears a grudge, and he says, I'm going to kill him. When Yitzhak dies, I'm going to come after him. And Rivka heard this, and she tells Yaakov to flee and to marry, go back to Haran and marry over there so that he doesn't marry the cursed Canaanites like Esav did. And now Esav hears that. Esav hears that Yaakov was told to go and marry good girls over there, and that the Canaanites are no good. So what does he do? Vayar Esav kiraot bnot Kna'an. Esav saw that the Canaanite wives that he had were no good. Be'nei Yitzchak aviv, in the eyes of his father. Vayelech Esav el Ishmael. And Esav goes to his uncle Ishmael, marries his daughter. Veikach et machalat bat Ishmael ben Avraham achot nevayot al nashav lo leisha. He takes on a third wife. He marries the daughter of Ishmael. And based on this, the sages say that in the end of days, there will be this union between Edom and Ishmael against Israel. Just as happened here, that Esav marries into Ishmael's family, that at the end of days as well, there will be almost like a conspiracy, that Esav and Ishmael, the world of Edom and the world of Ishmael, will unite against Israel. And this is mentioned in many different places. The Vilna Gaon says it. And he says that if Esav and Ishmael marry, it's a destructive to the world. And the Vilna Gaon metaphorically says this is the meaning, the mystical meaning behind the Torah's prohibition of yoking a donkey and a bull together. The Torah forbids to yoke together a donkey and a bull. The pshat is, the simple meaning is because these are two incompatible animals, right? So it's not going to be comfortable for them to be yoked together. And it's tsar ba'alei chaim, it's animal cruelty. That's the pshat. But the Vilna Gaon says it on a deeper level. What does this mean? Who is the bull and who is the donkey? The bull is Esav and the donkey is Ishmael, symbolically. And this is not like an insult thing. The symbol of Europe actually was a bull. Because if you remember, where does the name Europe come from? Anybody know? Well, what's Europe? Who? Yeah, Europe. It's the myth of Europa. You remember the myth of Europa? Zeus took the form of a bull and seduced this woman, this princess, Europa, and he carried her off to Europe, or to Crete specifically, where the first European civilization formed. That's the whole myth. The name Europe comes from the bull-formed Zeus abducting Europa. And she actually happened to be a princess, guess where? According to the Greek myth, Europa was the princess of Tzor, of Tyre, in Lebanon. She was a Phoenician princess. So think back to the class we did on Lebanon a few weeks ago, right? Again, the same themes, the significance of Lebanon in all of this. Lebanon, this is again part of the Holy Land. Tzor is still...
Lebanon's Christian.
And right, until recently, yeah. So think about that as well. Tzor is technically within the boundaries of the Holy Land too. So, and that's where we said King Hiram was from and the family of Nasrallah. When we did the class on Lebanon, that Hassan Nasrallah's family, he wasn't born there, but his family is Tyrians. They're from Tzor. So she was a Phoenician princess from Tzor, and Zeus, in the form of a bull, abducted her. And so Europe is actually, its origin myth is this relationship between the bull Zeus and Europa, and hence the name Europe. And Ishmael is symbolized by a donkey. He's called in the Torah explicitly a pere Adam, literally translated as a wild ass. Yado bakol veyad kolbo, somebody whose hand is in everything. His hand is on everyone, everyone's hand's on him. There's no peace wherever there's Ishmael, and that's also true in the world today, unfortunately, that you know how it is. Wherever there's Muslims, there's conflict, unfortunately, whether it's in England or in France or in Sweden or in Germany, in their own countries, in other countries. That's exactly what the Torah says. Yado bakol veyad kolbo, that they're constantly involved in conflict. So that's what the Vilna Gaon says is what the Torah's prohibition of lo tacharosh b'shor uvechamor yachdav, do not yoke a bull and a donkey together. He says mystically it means that if Esav and Ishmael ever joined forces and married, it would be destructive to the world. These two qualities together would be devastating for the world. So that's really this hidden prophecy about the end of days. And we see it playing out today. You see what's going on with the Edomite world, the European world, and the Ishmaelite Muslim world. You see what's the European Union always throwing stumbling block in front of Israel, very pro-Palestinian constantly. And the European Union, who took in so many millions of Muslims, it's already becoming, the European Union is becoming Muslim. You see it, look what happened in Amsterdam. There's no control. The police can't control them. They do whatever they want. They've taken over. There are whole neighborhoods in Paris, in England, in France, that it's Sharia law. There's a sign. You're stepping into Sharia law. So you see this fusion of Esau and Ishmael happening right before our eyes. Europe has already fallen. And they know that, and they're open about it. The Muslims are very open about it. They talk about it like, that's it, we've taken over. It's only a matter of time, 1-2 more generations with their high birth rates. It's finished. And you see it every day in the news. Spain, which unilaterally recognized the Palestinian state and now detained a Danish ship. I don't know if you saw this, because supposedly the Danish ship was carrying weapons to Israel. So the Spanish actually blocked it. You see this all over the place, whether it's in Sweden or in Amsterdam. You see this fusion of Edom and Ishmael. We saw it in the past. We've talked about this before with Hitler and his best friend, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti. You remember this? You've probably seen the pictures. The Grand Mufti, really, he was the one that started this whole Palestinian movement. He's the father, he is the architect of this conflict. He's the one that inspired the Hebron massacre in 1929, before there was a state of Israel even. Right? A bunch of Arabs slaughtered countless Jews, slaughter, rape, burned down in Hebron. Right? The Arab riots in 1936, 1937. So Hajj Amin presided over all of this. And then the British actually wanted to arrest him, so he fled to fascist Italy and then to Germany. And there's pictures of him with Hitler, and they were going to collaborate together, and Hajj Amin was going to implement the final solution in Israel, because remember, Hitler's goal was Berlin to Baghdad. Hitler wanted everything Berlin to Baghdad, and Hajj Amin was happy to help him. And so we saw that as well. That's also another fusion of Edom and Ishmael. And you see it now, as we've spoken about a lot recently, with Russia being one of the key entities of Edom, the Red One, the Red Empire, who's helping Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and all this, and is siding firmly in the anti-Israel camp. So we see this fusion, this marriage of Edom and Ishmael today. Going back to Esau, where do we see Esau next in the Torah? Next time we see him is when Yaakov comes back from Haran, having spent 20 years with Lavan. After 20 years with Lavan, Yaakov's coming back, and he sees, Vayisa Yaakov einav, vayar ve'ina Esav ba ve'imo 400 ish. And Esau is coming at him with 400 men. So Yaakov naturally is afraid. He thinks Esau is going to harm him. He wants to go to war. But then that's not what happens. What actually happens? Yeah, they embrace. Vayarotza Esav likrato. Esau runs to him, ve'yichapkehu, ve'yipol al tzvarav, ve'yishakehu, ve'yivku. He hugs him, he kisses him, and they cry over each other's shoulders. And I think this highlights very much the love-hate relationship that is Jewish Christian history for the past 2,000 years. Jews prosper in Europe, then they get destroyed. And then they rebuild, and they prosper, and they're friends, and then they're enemies. And they're friends, and they're enemies. Just like this constant cycle is this love-hate relationship. Esau's coming with an army of 400, but then hugs him and kisses him, right? And if you remember, there's something really special here in the Torah. What's special in this verse in the Torah? The dots, right? The word Vayishakeu, that Esau kissed him, has dots on every letter. It's very strange. Why are there dots on every letter? Our sages say that it's because, Esau didn't really genuinely kiss him. It was all a deception. Maybe he even bit him. So he didn't actually kiss him. Some say that's one tradition. And Rashi explains that there's nakud alav, that the word Vayishakeu has dots, veyesh cholkin badavar hazeh, and it's a debate. Some say yesh darshu nakuda zu shelo nashko bechol libo. Some say it's because he didn't genuinely, wholeheartedly kiss him. However, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Rashbi said, Alacha hi bayadua she'esav soneh leYaakov. We know that as a general rule, Esau hates Yaakov, but in this particular case, he was actually wholehearted. So Rashbi holds that no, this was a genuine kiss at this particular moment. Although generally speaking, Esau hates Yaakov, this was a genuine kiss. And the fact that it's Rashbi, Shimon Bar Yochai, saying it is significant, because there's a tikkun here at play. Because when is Yaakov and Esau ultimately going to make peace? Rashbi's whole mindset is rectifying the world, and there will be a rectification here. So this kiss plays a big role, and we'll come back to that. And then Esau invites Yaakov, says, let's live together, come with me to his new home. Where is Esau's home? It's called Har Seir, this mountain, Mount Seir. But Yaakov doesn't trust him and finds a way to get out of it. He says, I have a lot of kids, they're little, they're not going to be able to make such a long journey. You go, and I'll eventually catch up with you. And Esau offers him an escort, and Yaakov says, no, don't worry about it, I'm good, just go, I'll come, it's fine. So he gets out of it, right? That was the whole, and then he never actually goes there, which we have to explain. We never see in the Torah that Yaakov goes. So he said he would come to Seir, but he never does. So we have to address that too. Why did Yaakov not go to Seir? And we have to understand this word Seir. That's the key. Why is Edom living on Har Seir? What is a Seir? This is the next word that we have to unravel. What is a Seir? Seir means hairy, and it means a goat. So Esau was described as being Seir, as being really hairy. So it's fitting that he lives on the hairy mountain, on Har Seir. But also in the Torah, the word Seir you see it everywhere. It's a very common word. And it means a goat. You see it in the temple sacrifices all the time, right? Seir lechatat. Every Rosh Chodesh, they would sacrifice a goat, a particular species, not a regular gdi, but maybe a particular hairy goat that they would sacrifice every Rosh Chodesh, Seir lechatat. On Yom Kippur, there was the Seirim le'azazel, right? The Seir le'azazel. They would take two of these Seirim. One would be sent to Azazel. One would be sacrificed in the temple. So a Seir is a goat. And more specifically, it's not just a goat. It's not just a regular gdi. But Seir is also used in the Torah as a goat demon. That pagans worshipped demon goats. You've heard of this before?
No, I just know that Satanists have
Exactly. So I want to get to that. The Torah actually says in Vayikra, it's a prohibition that's explicit, "V'lo yizbechu od et zivchem leseirim," that we must not sacrifice to these goat demons. Asher em zonim achareim chukat olam tiyeh. This is an eternal decree, God says, that you shall not worship these goat demons. Ledorotam, forever. And this applies to this day. And you might think, what is this? I don't see any goat demons to this day. But you actually do. You see them everywhere. You've heard of Baphomet, this goat demon symbol. It has a pentagram on it, and it's got both male and female body parts. This is the symbol of the Satanists, and you see it today, unfortunately, all over the place. And it's very prominent in the music industry. And you see it in all their performances at the Super Bowl halftime show and the Olympics opening ceremonies and Oscar performances. Yeah, this is conspiracy theory stuff. People think it's crazy, but look into it. You see some of these music videos, and you see the symbolism all over the place, right? The goat. What's that?
Live concerts, live performances.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You go to a concert and you see this. I went to a concert some years ago for a big pop star. Not going to say who, doesn't matter. But this was many years ago. But I was actually shocked and horrified there was one set that was entirely this, where all the dancers came out in the goat heads, the horns. The singer was in it. It was the whole thing. It was dark. There were pentagrams everywhere. It was actually frightening. Why do they do this? It's bizarre. I don't like conspiracy theories, but this is crazy. Why is this all over the place in the music industry, in Hollywood, in shows? It's the same. It's these goat demons all the time. And God is warning us, saying, throughout your generations, chukat olam, forever, ledorotam, you shall not be tempted by these goat demons, these seirim. And the seir le'azazel, this goat to Azazel, was actually a rectification for this goat demon worship. Remember, Azazel was this fallen angel who taught mankind all kinds of sins. And he introduced prostitution. And if you remember, we talked about this before in the class on the fallen angels and the watchers. The book of Jubilees talks about it, the book of Enoch. our Midrashim, the Zohar, the fallen angels, Azazel, Azazel, Shem Chazai. There were many fallen angels that taught mankind to sin, and their leader was Azazel. And the legend is that God bound him in the wilderness, east of the temple, east of Jerusalem, and they would send off a goat to Azazel as to atone for these sins, these horrible sins. But they exist throughout the generations, this like bizarre goat demon worship. And they always portray the Baphomet as having both male and female qualities. And this all is part of this. You see this today, this whole transgenderism thing. Look up how many celebrities have transgender children. It's bizarre. There's so many of them. Look it up. So many celebrities. Way more than what is normal. Way disproportionate to the biological reality. I'm not saying that transgenderism never exists, and we talked about this before. There are genuine, biologically, also chromosomal issues and embryological things and whatever. But among Hollywood stars, look up how many of them have transgender children.
Or non-binary.
Yeah, any of these, LGBTQ, non-binary, transgender, one of these things. It's just shocking. So there's something going on there. Again, I don't like conspiracy theories, but there's definitely something going on there. And the Torah warns us that this will happen. And the Torah mentions Seirim and says, Ledorotam. For this is in every generation you will see this goat demon worship. And we're seeing it today. And the Torah gives us multiple commandments in the 613 that it is our job to extinguish this nonsense and to fight it wherever we can and to detach from it, to cut it off and to destroy it. Not to go into their temples. And you think about the stadiums today that are filled with all these people, and this is the temples now. These are the goat demon temples and the iconography at these performances. So this is where it's coming from. So you have to be aware of it. So why did Yaakov not want to go to Seir? You might read this story and think, hey, shouldn't this be a happy ending? Esau says, hey, come with me to Seir. Everything will be great. We're going to be friends. I have so much riches and you're going to have so much fun. And Yaakov says, no, thank you. I know all about the Seirim. I just spent 20 years with Lavan. I won't go to Seir. It's all a trick, right? That's how they get the children today too, right? It's fun, it's a party, it's this, it's that, it's riches, it's fame and fortune. Esau says, I have lots of money. And Yaakov says, I have everything. Kol. I have everything I need. I don't need anything else. So he did not want to go to Seir for this reason. And where did he go instead? What does the Torah say? Where did Yaakov go instead? He went to Sukkot. Yaakov went to Sukkot. Right? That's a pshat in the Torah. So instead of going to Seir, Yaakov went to Sukkot. He sheltered in God's hut, right? In the clouds of glory. Yeah. So that's why Yaakov didn't want to go there. And so that's the whole Seir thing, being aware of it. And it's not just today. The ancient Greeks had it. The ancient Romans had it. And you find it specifically in the Edomite world. You don't see it in Ishmael, as far as I know. You don't see it in the world of Ishmael. You don't see it in the Far East. You see this iconography in the world of Edom. The Greeks had it. The Greeks had a god named Pan. Pan was this sexual deviant god that was molesting everybody, and he's symbolized by the same goat, half man imagery. And the statues of him, I don't recommend that you look them up, but they're grotesque. Like ancient Greek statues of Pan are disgusting. And all kinds of sins. And why would they even make these things? It's bizarre. And the satyrs, the Satyr, it's a half goat, half man hybrid. Again, these like sexually deviant beings that were always depicted with an erection, a permanent erection. Like this is throughout Greek and Roman mythology. So you see it in the Edomite world, in the European world, in European mythology throughout history to the present day. And it's a problem. It's a disease of the West. As far as I know, you don't see it in the East. So Jacob wanted nothing to do with this, and Yaakov went straight to Sukkot. However, Yaakov didn't lie. He said, I will eventually come to Seir. So what does Rashi say? Ve'imata yelech, and when will Yaakov finally go to Esav? B'imei Mashiach. In the time when Mashiach comes, Shene'emar, as it says in the prophet Ovadia, which we're going to talk more in depth about later, because Ovadia is a prophecy for Edom. Ovadia is one chapter. It's the shortest book in Tanakh. Ovadia the prophets, 1 chapter, 21 verses. It's the Haftarah of Parashat Vayishlach. And the prophecy begins that this is a prophecy for Edom. And it ends by saying, Va'alu Moshiim behar Tzion, lishpot et har Esav. Right? That the saviors, that Mashiach, maybe this is Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, would come to judge Esav at the end of days. So Rashi says, when will Yaakov finally meet Esav in Seir? On Judgment Day. And after that, presumably, they will make peace between Esav and Yaakov finally, at the end of days. And to finish the Esav story, he appears just one last time in the Torah. When Yitzhak passes away, chapter 35, Vayikva Yitzhak vayamot, vayasef el amav, zaken usva yamim. He was fulfilled of days. He lived a full 180 years, 10 times high. Veikberu oto Esav v'Yaakov banav. And Esav and Yaakov buried him together. And that leads directly to chapter 36. What is chapter 36? It's this very long and detailed genealogy of Esav and his descendants. It's long, detailed, and the sages are puzzled by this chapter because they all ask, what was the point of this? Why do we need this chapter? It's often described as seemingly the most useless chapter in the whole Torah. It's this long list of Esav's genealogies. Why does it matter? Why do we need to know about all the different aloof this, aloof that, the chief of that tribe, the kings of Edom, and why is this even important? The Arizal makes a big deal out of this. Because for the Arizal, this whole chapter is a metaphor for Shvirat HaKelim, for creation, for the shattering of the vessels at the beginning of creation, and the 7 kings that are mentioned are the 7 Sfirot and all this stuff. So the Arizal sees this whole thing as a meditation for the shattering of the vessels at the beginning of time. And that's really important again, because the Arizal's whole mindset is bringing rectification, tikkunim, rectifying the world to bring Geula, to bring the final redemption. So there's a hint there that Esav needs rectification to bring about Geula. So that's the Arizal's thing. We're not going to focus on that. We want to focus on 2 people on this list. In this long list, there are 2 names that are particularly, or 3 maybe, names that are particularly important. What are these names? Which names do you remember? Amalek is the first one, because this is always described. Amalek is the title for Israel's arch nemesis. Amalek is the anti-Israel. So we read, Vatimna, there was this woman named Timna, Haita Pilegesh leElifaz. She was the concubine of Eliphaz ben Esav. Eliphaz was the son of Esav. He had a concubine named Timna. Vataled leElifaz et Amalek, and she gave birth to Amalek. Who is Amalek? Why is Amalek this anti-Israel force? The name itself, we've talked about this before, that if you split the letters, Amalek literally is Amal, which is labor, and Kuf. Kuf means a monkey. It's monkey labor. Meaning, Amalek's whole vision, it's an anti-God force. It's the opposite of Israel. If Israel's job is to spread godliness to the world, Amalek is to spread atheism to the world, the other way. If Israel's job is to bring light, Amalek brings darkness. You think about the Baphomet and all of that goat demon stuff, to deviate people from the godly path. Amalek is the anti-Israel. Israel wants to teach the world that you are holy, you are special, God made you, you're an angelic divine being with a purpose, you should be as righteous and godly as you can be. Amalek is teaching the opposite. Amal kof, you're just a monkey, you're just an ape, you're just a glorified ape, you're just the product of millions of years of particles and coming together and random mutations, right? You're just an ape, a glorified ape. There's no greater meaning to your life. That's how Israel splits into Yashar El, straight to God. Israel's about building a direct relationship to God. No intermediates, no idols, nothing. Yashar El, straight to God. Amalek is Amal Kof. It's the work of the monkey. Israel's letters even. The Lamed is going up to Hashem. Right? Israel ends with Lamed, going up, the only letter that goes above the line up to God. And Amalek ends with Kuf. It's the only letter that goes below the line, down into Klipa, down into the impurity. That's the opposite, these 2 opposite forces of Israel and Amalek. Amalek is that atheistic force that seeks to cut the connection to God and undermine Israel at every opportunity.
Anything that is atheistic?
I think that's Amalek energy. Anything that tries to separate people from God and from living a righteous, holy, moral life is Amalek energy. It's coming from that spiritual source, from that impure spiritual source.
But as a nation, they don't exist.
No, that there's no, it's important to mention that there's no biological people called Amalek today. Certainly we don't know, and we can't say that this group of people is, no. But these are spiritual entities. There's the spiritual force called Amalek. And people are getting brainwashed by it and succumb to this ideology, this Amalek ideology, this anti-God, anti-Israel ideology.
What about I've heard rabbis say Amalek is the one who want to destroy Israel for the sake of destroying it.
Right.
Prey on the vulnerable.
Yes, exactly. Amalek, is their whole mission is the destruction of Israel. Even they will give up their own life for it. They will destroy themselves. They have no value for life. Because again, you're just an ape. You're just an animal. You're just a monkey. They have no value for life. Israel values life above all else. Amalek has no value for human life. They will sacrifice millions if necessary. You saw it with Haman, Haman is explicitly called as an Amalekite. You saw it with the Nazis. You remember at the end of the war, when the Nazis were losing, instead of directing their resources to the war effort, instead they directed all their resources to the extermination of the Jews. Right? Instead of diverting their trains to supply lines, the Nazis said, no, it's fine, we'll lose this. We'd rather kill more Jews. And it's complete they don't care. So there's no value for human life, not even their own life. And you see it today with Hamas. Hamas, same thing. They don't value life. They will put rockets in kindergartens, in hospitals. If they can kill a Jew, they are willing to sacrifice 10 of their own children. The fact that they even did October 7, what did they think would be the response? Obviously, they knew that it would be a devastating response and that they would lose in return 10 times more people, maybe 100 times. And they did it anyways. They don't care. They don't care. There is no value for human life. Right? Their goal is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth at any cost. That's Amalek. That's Amalek energy. It's in their charter. Hamas's charter is, first of all, to wipe Israel off the face of the map from the river to the sea. And second, quoting the Hadith, that they're going to reach every Jew hiding behind every rock and every tree. That is their stated goal. There's no logic to it.
So Rambam says the mitzvah that the Rebbe comes to Amalek isn't applicable anymore, but is that mitzvah even applicable for us today?
So we don't know because, first of all, we don't have a Sanhedrin. And second of all, because we can't say for sure who is Amalek. Right? So we can't say that. And it's wrong to say that all that Palestinians are Amalek. That's not true. The anti-Zionist, anti-Israel camp loves to use this. Like, Israel says that the Palestinians are Amalek and they're wiping them out. That's not true at all. That's not true. Right? What we're talking about is that the Hamasnikim that are willing to sacrifice themselves and their families and the children are the victims here. Right? They didn't do anything wrong. It's the people that are putting the rockets in the that's the Amalek energy. And again, we don't have the ability to identify anybody as that person's Amalek. But there's that Amalek energy, that anti-God energy, anti-Israel, anti-God, anti-life energy. And you see that whether it's in Hamas or whether in the West with this pagan worship, whether there's this rampant, whatever it is, abortion at 9 months, whatever, life has no sanctity. Assisted suicide, even for children. That was the debate here recently, if you remember. Should medically assisted suicide be allowed even for children? Right? There's just life is not holy. It's all the same Amalek energy. Your life is meaningless. There is no God. There is no afterlife. You're just a ball of cells anyways. So why not? That's the Amalek energy. And it comes from Edom. It comes from Esau. Amalek is the grandson of Esau. And so again, you see this fusion of East and West, right? Where you have the Western ultra-liberals who are pushing this Amalek ideology, uniting with Hamas, with Ishmael, who's on the opposite side of the religious spectrum, and yet somehow they're allies. Who are the biggest supporters of Hamas? Who are the people protesting on campus against Israel? Pro-Hamas, it's these same ultra-liberal people. It's the same thing at its core. It's that horseshoe theory. Right? People at the extreme left and at the extreme right are actually somehow the same. And Hamas is being supported again by who's supporting, who's giving them their money. Right? UNRWA, the European Union, Russia support. It's all, again, it's this marriage of Edom and Ishmael. Now, to go into, maybe we'll just finish this Amalek bit and we'll leave the rest for next time. Why did Amalek become the hater of Israel? Where did this come from? Why Amalek specifically? What is the origin story of Amalek? So the Midrash says, the Torah says, Vayishak Yaakov leRachel, that when Yaakov met Rachel, remember at the well, and he, Vayisad kolo vayefk, he gave her a kiss, Vayishak. Could also mean that he gave her water. It's not clear. But he maybe gave her a kiss or he gave her water. Vayisad kolo vayevk, and he cried. So classic question. Why is Yaakov crying? He just met his soulmate, the love of his life, and he's crying. Was he like a super sensitive guy? What happened? So Rashi says, Vayevk, why did he cry? Because at that moment he saw a vision of his life with her, and he saw that she's going to die young, prematurely, and he's going to have to bury her on the path. Bethlehem, like we mentioned last time, when we spoke about the graves of tzaddikim, that she's not going to be buried by his side in Me'arat HaMachpelah, in the cave of the patriarchs. That's why he cried. He foresaw that she would have an untimely early death, and he'd have to bury her by the road. Another explanation, Lefi sheba beyadayim reikaniot, because he came to her with empty hands. Why did he come to her with empty hands? He said, Amar Eliezer Eved Avi Abba, hayo beyadav nezamim utzmidim umigdanot, ve'ani ein be'adi klum. When Eliezer, his grandfather's servant, came to find a wife for his father Yitzchak, remember, Eliezer came with lots of gold and gifts, and he gave Rivka all the stuff to make the shidduch, right? He gave her all these gifts. And now Yaakov's coming, and he meets his soulmate Rachel, and he has no gift for her. He has nothing to give her. So he was crying because he was sad that he had nothing. Now, why did he have nothing? Where's all his stuff? He wasn't a young guy. He was older already at this point. So why didn't he have anything? Right, Lefi she'radaf Elifaz, not Lavan, this is before Lavan. Lefi she'radaf Elifaz ben Esav, that Eliphaz, the son of Esav, actually chased after. When Yaakov ran away, Esav told his son Eliphaz to go after him and get him. And Eliphaz went after him, b'mitzvat aviv, leholgo, to kill him, v'hisigo, and he caught up to him. Ulefi she'gadal Eliphaz b'cheko shel Yitzchak, but because Eliphaz grew up with his grandfather Yitzchak, and he was a good guy, Mashach Yadav, he restrained himself and he didn't kill Yaakov. Eliphaz was commanded by Esav to go kill Yaakov, and he didn't do it. Amar lo, he told him, Ma e'aseh letzivui shel Abba, what shall I do? My father commanded me to do this. Eliphaz asked Yaakov, what am I to do? So what did Yaakov tell him? Yaakov knew some Gemaras, and we know the rule. Amar lo Yaakov, Tol ma shebeyadi, ve'he'ani chashuv kamet. We know in Jewish law there's this idea that there's some types of people are, practically speaking, considered like in a state of being deceased. And one of those people is a poor person. If a person's completely destitute and has nothing, it's like he's called, metaphorically, it's like he's dead. If a person has completely nothing. So Yaakov said, here's a way to fulfill your father's command. He said to kill me, take everything that I have, strip me bare. Then I'll be considered halachically almost like a dead man. So you fulfilled your father's wishes. And go. So Eliphaz took everything from Yaakov, he had nothing. That's why Yaakov came to the well with nothing at all. And that's why he cried. That's the story.
What does that have to do with Amalek?
What does this have to do with Amalek? Then Eliphaz couldn't get Yaakov. So here comes Amalek. Amalek was the son of Eliphaz. The Midrash says, Tana de Eliyahu, Amalek haya omer el Eliphaz aviv. Amalek would ask his father Eliphaz, Mihu sheyoresh ha'olam hazeh ve'olam haba. Who is that righteous person who's going to inherit this world and the next world? Who should be my role model? And what did Eliphaz say? Israel. Israel is the one that should be your role model. Be like them. They inherit Yorshin Ha'olam Hazeh ve'Ha'olam Haba. They're prosperous, they're successful in this world and in the next world. Lachen lech achshav. So Eliphaz gave him some advice. He said, okay, so therefore go v'chafor lahen borot, sichin, me'arot, shel mayim, kidei lishtot hen umiknehen, ve'achen lahem drachim, im ta'aseh ken tiskeh v'tirash v'tinchal v'tavo l'olam haba. What should you do? Go and be a partner with them. Israel's prospering, be like them. Go work with them. Dig wells with them. Build roads with them. Invest with them. Do partnership. Learn from them. And you'll be like them. You will also then inherit this world and the next world. That's good advice for all the anti-Semites out there. Right? Instead of trying to fight Israel, you see that Israel's prosperous. The anti-Semites are always saying, oh, it must be a conspiracy. The Jews are here and there. They control this industry and they control that. And they're all the lawyers and doctors. And they're in government and they're in business. And all these tech giants are Jews. You know, instead of fighting it and thinking it's a conspiracy, go work with them. The smart ones actually go and work with the Jews and invest with them. And you'll be successful too. Be like them. Use them as a role model. Instead of trying to fight them and destroy what they built, build the same, do the same, be like them, and you'll succeed. That's what Eliphaz told Amalek. But what did Amalek do? He didn't do that. He said, הוא לא עשה כן, אלא כיוון שאמר לו רישומו של דבר, מיד יצא עמלק להחריב את העולם. Instead, Amalek said, nah, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go against them. I'm going to fight them, and I'm going to take it away from them. I'm going to destroy what they have. That is the Amalek ideology, right? Illogical. Willing to give up everything. Olam haba and olam hazeh. Willing to give up his life, to take it away from Israel, to get them to fail. And it cites in Shmot, when the Jewish people in Israel came out of Egypt, what's the first thing that confronted them after the splitting of the sea? It was Amalek. The Amalekites came to fight them. Think about that. The Israelites just came out of Egypt with great miracles. They just defeated the biggest empire in the world. The great Egypt was brought down to its knees. And this little startup, the Amalekites, come to fight Israel. Like, they have no fear, they have no recognition of God, they don't care. They just saw Israel defeat the much more powerful Pharaoh and Egypt. They don't care. They're coming to fight Israel. They cannot handle it. They do not want to allow Israel to do their job. They want to fight, and they don't want to be like Israel. They're the anti-Israel. And this struggle continues. The same chapter in Shmot says, remember, Moshe raised his hands. If you remember the battle, Yoshua went to the battle. The Israelites defeated the Amalekites, and the passage there ends with a very important mitzvah that we still have to this day, that we should remember Amalek, remember that they exist in every generation, and it says, Vayomer ki yad al kesiya milchama le'Hashem be'Amalek midor dor, that God is struggling with Amalek in every generation. So we have to remember this. It's not that Amalek ceases to exist thousands of years ago. It's still around. The Torah guarantees it for you. The energy of Amalek is around in every generation, midor dor. And we still have Amalek energy in the world today. So when we remember the mitzvah of Zachor et Amalek, this mitzvah of Zachor, Parashat Zachor, it's still around. We're not just remembering something that happened thousands of years ago. There's still this anti-God force in the world.
The question arises, since God controls everything, the question arises, there must be a purpose for Amalek.
The simple answer why Amalek exists is for the same reason that evil exists. Why does evil exist? To balance it out. It's the balance in nature. It's the balance in the cosmos. Without Amalek, it would be too easy. It would just be too easy. History would be over. We would have finished our job a long time ago. If there was no opposing force, there's no point. It's like if you're playing sports. If everybody's on the same team, what's the point? Right? The whole purpose of the game is that there's two sides and there's opposition, and then one side ultimately wins over the other. There has to be a balance. Otherwise, there's no point. You have to have these opposing forces. So we still didn't answer the psychological question here, which is why? So Eliphaz tells his son Amalek, go be like Israel. And instead, he goes against. Where is that really coming from? What trauma did he experience as a child to make him do this? And I think it's related to his mom, not his dad. Famous story in the Gemara, in Sanhedrin. that Timnah wanted. First, the Gemara actually asks, again, why does the Torah mention this long list of chapter 36 of Esau's genealogies? Who cares? Why is this necessary? Did Moshe, did Moshe have nothing better to write than this? Why do we need to know this? Why does it need to tell us ve'achot lotan timna ve'timna aita pilegesh le'Elifaz? Why does the Torah need to tell us about this woman named Timna who was a concubine for Elifaz? It seems irrelevant. It's in extra detail. What's the story? She wanted to come and do a giyur. She wanted to convert. She wanted to join the family of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. She wanted to join into the Holy Covenant. She had good intentions. So she came, ba'ata etzel Avraham, Yitzchak ve'Yaakov, ve'lo kiblua. She came to Avraham and wanted to join the family, and he said no. She came to Yitzchak, she came to Yaakov, nobody wanted to accept her. Timna. So what did she do? Alcha ve'aita pilegesh le'Elifaz ben Esav. So she ended up marrying or being a concubine to Elifaz. Amra, she said, mutav, it's better, tiye shifcha le'uma zo, ve'lo tiye gvira le'uma acheret. I mean, this is the closest I can get to this family. I can't marry Yaakov, I can't marry, Yitzchak. At least I can get Esav. I can join in, I can marry into Esav's family. And what happened? Nafak mina Amalek. And from her came Amalek. She was repelled by our patriarchs to the point where she was very disgruntled, and she ended up marrying into Esav's family and took on those negative qualities and gave birth to Amalek. And what is the point of all this? The Gemara says, Ma'itama, they should have embraced her. The Gemara says that Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov should have welcomed Timnah. They should have opened the doors to her. Had they not pushed her away, this would not have happened. So the Gemara actually points out that our patriarchs had some culpability here and some responsibility for this. And the lesson is for us also that it's important not to be too closed off as a people. Right? Sometimes we close ourselves too much and we become too isolationist, and then people, the non-Jewish world, is afraid of that. Say, well, what's going on over there? Is there some secret cabal? We've talked about this before. We need to go out there and actually show the world, teach the world, open Torah learning to the world, open the community, show the world that there's nothing sinister here. It's the opposite, that this is godly stuff. And if you actually show them, then that's going to help to mitigate a lot of that hatred. And we shouldn't rebuff people. People want to convert. So many people want to become Jewish, so many. And they get pushed away too much. Right? There has to be a right balance where, yes, you don't want to open the floodgates because you want to make sure people are sincere. But at the same time, I've heard many times, and I've seen with my own eyes, genuine, people who were righteous wanted to convert and were pushed away and were unfortunately even abused and eventually left the path entirely. Right, it becomes a Chilul Hashem. It becomes a desecration instead of a Kiddush Hashem, it becomes a Chilul Hashem. So we've spoken about this before, that we do need to open our doors a little more and do more hasbara, more kiruv, even to the non-Jewish world, and to be less isolationist. And that's actually also going to help to counter this anti-Semitism and this Amalekite energy, because the Amalek is winning over the minds of regular people. It's not like every anti-Semite is Amalek. That's not. Most of the anti-Semites are just victims that have been brainwashed. Most of the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist people are just brainwashed victims. They just don't know any better. It's coming out of ignorance. And so we need to counter that. But that's the Amalek origin story. And the sages specifically tie it into, if only we were a little bit more open, maybe it wouldn't have happened, maybe. Amalek still exists. There's this force. It would have happened regardless. God wanted this force, unfortunately, to exist. It's a counterbalance. But there is also a message there. And we see it's Amalek is the grandson of Esau. It's coming from the world of Edom. We know historically anti-Semitism is coming from that world. Today there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the Muslim world, but they're only ripping off old medieval Christian European ideas. Right? And remember Edom, Russia, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, one of the most anti-Semitic texts, that came from Russia. And it comes from, whether it's the blood libels, which the Muslim world has adopted today, that's a European medieval invention, accusation. All these illogical, anti-Semitic, ridiculous tropes and things. It all comes from Europe, and today it's entered the Muslim world, perhaps even China now has some problem with anti-Semitism, but it is all coming from the Western world. Amalek is coming from Edom. That's the association. Amalek is a grandson of Edom. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that all Edom is automatically anti-Semitic. It's the Amalek force within. It's not all of Edom. It's a particular energy within Edom. And you find in the world of Edom as well many Philo-Semites. There is actually also a lot of love for the Jews and for Israel. And you see it in the evangelical community in the United States. You see it in Europe. You see it in many different places. And there is Philo-Semitism as well, so we shouldn't forget that. And Philo-Semitism is really a tikkun for this. It's a rectification for the negative qualities of Esau. They're doing the counter force. And that part of Esau, the good part of Esau, some people refer to it as the head of Esau. Not the body of Esau, but the head of Esau. The good part of him is the head. Why the head? You remember the Midrash about Esau's head? We talked about this briefly last time. That the cave of the patriarchs has buried in it Adam and Eve, Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah, and the head of Esau. Not the body, but the head of Esau. You remember this story? Because this is really the last time in the Torah's account of Esau where he appears. It's not in the Torah itself, but the Gemara says that when Yaakov passed away in Egypt, he was mummified, if you remember, and then they transferred him to be buried at the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron. And the Gemara says in Masechet Sotah, Kevan she'giu le'me'arat ha'machpelah, when they came to the cave of the patriarchs, Ata Esav kame'akev, and Esav came to block the way. Amar lahen, he told them, Mamre Kiryat ha'arba hi Hebron, that Hebron is Kiryat Arba, and it's called Kiryat Arba. The original name was the place of four. Why? Because Arba Zugot Hayu, that there were four couples buried there, like we just said. Adam and Eve, Avraham, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, Leah. And what Esau said was, Leah was already buried there. Now Yaakov's coming. They're bringing Yaakov to be buried next to Leah. And he said, this is my plot. The plot that you want to bury Yaakov in, next to Leah, I belong here. Esau said, this is my place. And if you remember the class on the real meaning of Israel, Leah was originally supposed to be Esau's shidduch. Yaakov was supposed to marry Rachel, and Esau was supposed to marry Leah. So here comes Esau and says, next to Leah, that's my burial plot. I belong there. And the brothers tell him, no, but you sold your birthright. You sold everything. And he says, oh, what? I sold this too? He says, yeah, you sold everything. So he says, okay, show me the bill of sale. And they said, no problem. The bill of sale's in Egypt. So Esau wants to see the bill of sale. So the brothers say, okay, we'll send Naphtali. Why Naphtali? Because he was the fastest runner. Naphtali, the Torah describes him as Ayala Shlucha, as a fast fleet like a deer. So, okay, Naphtali, go down to Egypt, find the bill of sale. And meanwhile, what's happening? One of the children of Dan, his name was Hushim, and he was deaf. Note also that Hushim is an anagram of Mashiach. It's like same letters, same gematria. Hushim was deaf, and he said, what's going on? He asked Hushim Barei the Dan, the son of Dan, was standing there, and he's like, what's going on? What's the holdup? Who is this guy? Okay. And I guess they use sign language. The brothers told him, well, he's Ma'akev, he's like blocking us from burying him until Naphtali goes to Egypt and gets the bill of sale. And Hushim said, Yeheh avi abba mutal bevizayon. My grandfather is they're doing this bizayon, this desecration of my grandfather's holy corpse. Shakal kulpa mechaye, and he took a club or an axe or whatever and essentially decapitated Esau. And his head rolled into the cave of the patriarchs. So his head was buried there. That ended the story. There's different versions of the story. This particular one says that as his head rolled, his eyes looked up and fell out at Yaakov's feet, and apparently Yaakov's a smile emerged on Yaakov's corpse. He opened his eyes and smiled, and that's how this particular version in the Gemara ends. But the point is that Esau's head, the good part of Esau, merited to be buried in Me'arat HaMachpelah, but the bad part, his body, the sinful body, was not. And the Gemara finishes and says, "Be'ota sha'a nitkayema nevuata shel Rivka." At that moment, the prophecy of Rivka, their mother, was fulfilled. Because if you remember what she said, "Lama eshkal gam shnechem yom echad." Why should I lose both of you on the same day? Rivka had said originally. And now this is what happened, that they both were buried on the same day. So it's like Rivka lost both of them. They didn't die on the same day, but they were buried on the same day in Me'arat HaMachpelah. So that's how Esau's story ends. I think this is a natural point to stop. We want to focus, we'll leave it for next time, we'll focus on the good part of Esau, the head of Esau, and what's the connection to what's going on in the world today. Is Donald Trump a part of it? Maybe Donald Trump as the good head of Esau. This is the philo-Semitism world. We want to talk about the tikkun of Esau, what is in store for Esau and Edom. So we'll do the whole part 2 about the end of days. We'll leave it for next time.